Hi class, this is Dr. Eimerbrink here. I wanted to present today on our lecture on chapter 9, aggression and antisocial conduct. So in this chapter, we talk a lot about the different theories surrounding aggression. How do we come up with the idea of what aggression is? How does aggression manifest, etc.? And so I'm going to talk to you today about some of those theories. So let's take a look at our PowerPoint slide for this chapter. When we think about aggression, there are many examples that we can come to, right? So oftentimes we see aggression in the capacity of what someone has done, right? And then we go back and we say, well, why were they aggressive? And so this was a news story that had come out. This man actually murdered German tourists. And of course, when something horrific like that happens, we ask ourselves, well, what prompted that behavior? Why was that person engaging in something so horrific? And so we go back and we took a look, or individuals went back in this news story and they took a look at his background. And what they found was that he was very interested in guns when he was younger. In fact, he himself says he never should have been born. But it begs the question, again, of what influenced that aggression in the first place. Now, this isn't the only example. We had a shooting in Virginia Tech. This was the first sort of mass shooting that we saw, particularly on a college campus. And the fallout from that was huge. Everybody wanted to know, how did this happen? How could we not, why didn't we catch this before? How did somebody not see the warning signs? And so when these types of behaviors take place, we oftentimes go back and say, what influenced this extreme reaction to this aggression? So this brings us to the first part of your chapter, which talks about sort of different definitions of aggression. So Freud and Konrad Lorenz argue that aggression is basically a result of instinct, right? So Freud talks about instinct as this Thanos, this basic component of human nature that's responsible for the generation of aggressive energy in all human beings. Lorenz then says that we've got this sort of fighting instinct. It's in all of us. It's inherent to us. So in both of these examples, both with Freud and Lorenz, the idea is I engage in aggressive behavior because it's something internal. It's something instinctual. As you can imagine, this sparks a great deal of critique, right? If we're saying that instinctually people are aggressive, the first question that we then want to ask ourselves is, if aggression is sort of innate, why are some cultures and some societies more aggressive than others, right? I mean, across the board, then we should have equal numbers of aggression. Kuh in 1939 actually conducted a study, and he found that when kittens were raised with rats, right? So they were raised together and brought up together, they very rarely killed the kittens. When they became cats, rarely killed the rats, even after being exposed to various rat-killing feline models. So this suggests to us that even aggressive behaviors that we would assume is instinctual, right? Like cats typically kill mice. Even when we are aware of something that's more instinctual, we can actually decrease the behavior or almost entirely eliminate it. And this comes back to the idea of social learning. So I have for you in your notes, kind of going back to this cultural component, looking at aggressive behavior. So here you can see the United States, right? we are very high in the number of murders per 1,000 people. We're also pretty high in terms of armed robbery as well. Again, if this was instinctual and there wasn't any other component to it, across the board, we would actually be noting very similar numbers, but we don't, right? So this brings us to maybe a behavioral definition of aggression. So Arnold Buss talks about that there is this sort of goal-driven response, that we have this goal to we are trying to achieve a goal and therefore we act aggressively. Interestingly, Buss's definition actually emphasizes the consequences of an action rather than the intention of the actor, which is what we had sort of seen previously. So if we are kind of looking at this line of thought, it might lead a person then to rely on the intentional definition of aggression, right? And according to Arnold Buss, we could actually see this idea of aggressiveness almost divided into two different categories, right? So if we're taking a look at the intention, which is that behavior that has been designed to harm another person, then we could also take a look at maybe what is influencing these two categories that's influencing those. And within this, we have our hostile aggression. And here, my goal is to injure a victim. This is different from instrumental aggression. Here, one person harms another as a means to something that's maybe non-aggressive. But what about a social component to aggression? Bandura and others argue that aggression is a social label, and that we use that social label and we apply it to various acts. And these acts themselves are guided by our own judgment about what we believe is sort of aggressive, right? So in this way, our interpretation of aggression depends on the context in which we are a part of. So the environment in which we are a part of. So this could be social factors, it could be personal factors, it could be situational factors. And this is what prompts or helps us create an understanding about aggression. Condrey and Ross in 1985 conducted a really interesting study, kind of tapping into sort of these social beliefs about aggression. So they took kids and they videotaped two preschool children. And these two preschool children were playing pretty roughly in the snow. Now, what they did was the kids were themselves wearing these snowsuits, so you couldn't actually tell what the gender of the children were. Right? So essentially you're watching a video, and in that video, you're just seeing two kids in these snowsuits. You can't tell if they're boys or girls, and they're just generally playing aggressively. All right, now we want to see how people are interpreting or looking at that social behavior. And so as you're watching this video, all the researcher is doing is modifying the gender of the two children, right? Or rather the sex of the two children. So they're saying something like, the two children you're watching are both boys. The two children you're watching are both girls. The two children you're watching, one is a boy, one is a girl. Or they had another condition, right? They varied the boy and the girl in this situation. So again, remember here that the snowsuits are a disguise for our kids. And what they found is that people were more likely to be okay with two boys being aggressive. In fact, interestingly, it was actually rated as being less aggressive than any of the other conditions. So why? Well, we assume or where sort of socially we think it's acceptable for boys to be aggressive. You might have heard the whole old adage, boys will be boys, right? So when you see two boys engaging in rough and tumble play, then you just assume that that's normal behavior. So it's not really thought of as more aggressive. However, when we see that girl-girl paradigm, we believe that that actually looks much more aggressive. So this is very interesting, right? We can kind of see this modeled in a research study that's kind of looking at this from the perspective of an everyday situation, right? Kind of tapping into that real life situation. So kind of going in line with these learning theories, or sort of learning theory of aggression, we have the frustration aggression hypothesis. So this model actually has two basic propositions. The first is frustration always produces some form of aggression, and two, aggression is always caused by some form of frustration. So, of course, if this is the case and we're saying that frustration is a catalyst for aggression, right, there's going to be a problem here. So for an example, right, I'm a kid. I can no longer control the object that I have in my hand, right? So think about that video I showed you a while back where those kids were pulling on a string, and every time they pulled on a string, that video popped up, and it was a smiling baby, and the smiling baby was accompanied by this really happy song, right? So at first the kid didn't know what was happening, they just sort of pulled it, but then afterwards they figured it out and they kept on pulling it. Well, what happened when we disconnected the string in the back? In the video, the kids got really, really frustrated. They got upset. They visibly started crying, right? So the kids themselves got frustrated, but they weren't aggressive. They weren't going around hitting things or pushing things. They were just simply frustrated, right? So based on this, frustration is not necessary potentially for aggression. And so this gives us sort of the modified, Berkowitz gave us the revision of the frustration aggression hypothesis. So Berkowitz then contended that frustration merely is making us angry. And essentially it's only creating this kind of readiness, if you will, for aggressive acts. So it's creating that kind of situation that may make it likely for us to engage in aggressive behavior. So according to this theory, Berkowitz, sort of revised the original frustration aggression hypothesis. And Berkowitz' revised theory views then aggressive behavior stemming from a combination of both internal forces, so things like anger, aggressive habits, and external stimuli, things like aggressive cues. So of course, this also has its own set of problems and criticisms associated with it. So there are a few problems with this theory. The first is that this theory does very little to explain the development of aggressive habits. How do they even form in the first place? It also does little to explain how stimuli become aggressive cues. So how do we know what stimuli is going to become an aggressive cue versus one that's not? And then again, many aggressive acts are committed not out of a sense of anger. I might do something aggressively that has nothing to do with actually being angry in and of itself. So this shows you more of a visual representation of this Berkowitz frustration aggression hypothesis. So here you're seeing the frustration and kind of the stimuli, right? Both of this frustration, this attack, Both of these things influence our readiness to anger or to aggress. If we have this extremely high readiness, it might go back and influence these existing aggressive habits, right? But we also have the readiness to aggress, aggressive cues, and this also can influence our aggressive responses as well. So kind of going back to that social learning definition of aggression, kind of come back to Bandura, right? So with Bandura, this was the first model to stress cognitive influences on aggression. So up until this point, most theorists are concentrating on factors that are instigating aggression, right? What is the cause of that aggressive behavior? Bandura actually goes one step further, and he then tries to explain how aggressive behaviors are acquired and maintained. So according to Bandura, this happens in two ways. The first is observational learning. So we've got these cognitive processes by which children attend to and retain these aggressive responses that they see being committed. Or we have direct experiences. So a child is reinforced for aggressive behavior. If they are reinforced for that, right, they'll be more likely to use that aggressive means again. They can kind of pull from that. They've learned that it's been helpful to them. So how is aggression maintained? According to Bandura, aggressive children have more of this expectancy about what will happen as a result of that aggression, right? So in the language of Bandura's theory, these aggressive individuals might have almost this kind of self-reinforcement system in which their aggressive actions end up being a source of pride. So your book gives an example of this, and I want to kind of pull this for a second. So here is an example of this, and it was provided in a passage from Toch in 1969. And this sort of illustrates, I think, very nicely how aggression can actually be self-reinforcing. Okay, so here this man says, or this person says, and he said, "F you, man." And the dude got up, and we were both on him, man. And we beat him to a pulp. Once we got going, we just wasted the dude. Sent him on down to the hospital. And after that, I felt like a king, man. It felt like, I'm the man. You're not going to mess with me. I felt like everybody was looking up to me. So this example, I think, really shows us how we can engage in this aggressive behavior, and then subsequently it can almost turn into this source of pride. So in other words, according to Bandura, our aggressive habits are often persisting because, right, we are having these expectancies about the outcomes of the aggression. We might be getting some reward from it. It might